Okay. Just a little bit forwards on your chair, just to begin with. Slightly angled forwards. So that if you imagine a square formed by your feet and your hips, the corners, then you come forwards, not quite halfway, but you'll as you get used to the feeling of the postures, you'll find the place in the way that I've been describing. Just be aware that it is quite strong on your back. I found that over the years of teaching these classes, my back has conditioned into doing this because I do it quite a lot of obviously. But go nice and easy. If you do decide to stay in this position, just be aware that your back might start to tighten up, and at that point, sit back and rest. But beginning, just rubbing your hands together and tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down from one shoulder, your arm. The other side. Upper part of the chest. Down to your belly. And find your legs. Sitting back. Feet out. Weight dropping back in your chair. Just focusing on that feeling for a few moments of your weight draining away through your body, which with the support of the chair like this will come more straightforwardly than when you're in an upright position. So your shoulders dropping back, and your rib cage sort of softening slightly. Let your attention just broaden out a little bit and just notice any changes. Maybe you're breathing or sort of feeling in your back, your neck. Thoughts almost mirroring the process of your physical weight dropping, in the sense that they tend to get drawn downwards and inwards. And just beginning to settle. Put your feet in, come back to comfortable position upright. And see if you can find again that sense of that draining away. And just notice where, if anywhere, you're holding tightness. We habitually, it seems, take on certain tightness in our body when in an upright stance. And even when we're quite experienced with something like Tai Chi, and we don't feel that we know that we don't need it, still those old habits remain. Remember that the basic thing is downwards, full of gravity downwards. The hips sinking into the chair. And one of the things that this feeling of releasing, that there's always a physical limit, whether you're seated, whether you're standing, a physical limit to how far down your hips can go, even sitting on the floor. And yes, at the same time, the downward pull that we become aware of, which is basically the pull of gravity, remains. So one way of just sort of feeling that and feeling the effect of that, which can be quite dramatic, is to take this image of a clenched fist. If you hold your hand in front of you and carefully squeeze tightly, when I do this, I can feel it going right up my arm and into my shoulder and my chest. It's really quite uncomfortable. And then I just soften the fingers so that there's a little space down the middle of the fist that I can get my finger down. And the point here is that I've still got the structure. I've still got a fist there. From there to there. A lot of it is about this feeling within the body, whatever label you like on it. Once you've got a sense of that somewhere in your body, your arm, your hand is a straightforward way of getting that. You can go through the same process in different parts of your body. So for instance, if you again carefully just tighten up in lower back and hips, sort of pull in slightly, pull your belly in, and then release. And then pull in, and then release. And you can see a slight movement perhaps in my shoulders, but that movement doesn't seem to match the degree of dropping that I feel, because I'm dropping a lot further. My rib cage can drop, my shoulders can drop. So we can do that with the security of the chair. We know the chair is not going to collapse underneath us, and we can apply that all the way through. You could tighten up your toes, really pull your toes in, and then release, and get this sense of your feet sinking into the floor a bit. You could tighten up in your shoulders and get the same feeling. So the memory of that feeling becomes one of the images that feeds into our intent. And as we do that, we just register. We notice that the body doesn't collapse. We may get that feeling of dropping, but our shape remains, because our shape is supported from inside by the skeleton, the area around the skeleton, all the tissues, and that connected with the skeleton. And so we get this softer feeling developing really all through the body. And this is I suppose you could argue this is sort of like one of the primary objectives in Tai Chi, to recognize this feeling, to recognize how we can actually move towards it, and how we can maintain it through some of those sort of fairly complex movements and postures that we take. So let's start and turn in your head. We can also apply that same feeling to areas we want more movement in, where we feel there's a blockage or tightening, a barrier one way or another to the movement. Shoulders. We can also begin to work on the range of our movement, how far we're moving. I always recommend you start off quite small, but then think, well, go a bit further, and you meet this tightness. You get a sense for that developing. Sometimes you can get there, not there. I feel tight all up in my shoulders. Can I get that feeling of releasing in my shoulders. There are obviously going to be limits to this, but it means that we can gradually sort of erode away those barriers to the movement. And then going forwards. One way of describing the feeling is that the tightness dissolves away. Hands down to your sides. Tight in your arms. This applies on all levels. I remember one student I had many years ago. It was the first person I ever met who had ME in the days when it was still being referred to as yuppie flu. He was no static yuppie. He was a very active man. He'd done a lot of karate, he'd run marathon races and so on and so forth, but he developed this ME. And he used Tai Chi a lot, and he got back into running. And it was quite interesting. Bring your hands up now and wind around. One day he was chatting to me and he was saying he'd started running again, and runners hit what they call the wall, apparently, which is this sort of mental barrier, really. There's a physical element to it, but it's really the mental barrier. They really don't feel they can go any further. And he said the normal approach to the wall is you kind of grip tight and you push through the wall, go back the other way with your hands. He said he was running along and he kind of hit the wall, as the phrase goes. And then he remembered the Tai Chi and that softening process. And he started to apply that, and he said the wall just melted away. So once we get used to it, we can apply this in various situations. Rest your hands. And then easing forwards. As always, this is not a panacea. This is not foolproof. There will always be limits to our movements. There will always be those areas that don't quite give way. This is always the approach that we would take in Tai Chi. Sometimes the response takes time. So we need to be patient with this. And as always, don't just ignore those blockages. Particularly don't ignore the painful areas and think, all I've got to do is just relax and we'll be fine. You know, think about what's going on, understand what's going on. And practice giving yourself time. So I've talked before about these moments of what I've come to refer to as punctuation. The moments when the movement seems to really sort of die down. And I call them punctuation. They remind me of commas in the sentence. Those are the pauses in the sentence, or the commas or the punctuation points on the page that give the sentence a structure. And where we put those pauses, where we put those punctuations, can change the meaning of the sentence in some cases. And we can practice that in a very simple exercise like this. You go forwards, and rather than coming straight back, just rest, trying to, if you like, again, tighten up your toes and let them relax. Do the same thing with your thigh muscles, let them relax. And then go back. And then again in hips, buttocks, lower back. And just taking that moment so that you begin to get a very intuitive sense of what is actually going on physically within your body when that happens. And then you go back to doing it more smoothly. You don't actually physically stop, but there's just that moment when you settle, and then you come back and you settle again. And this brings us to one of the really lovely elements in Tai Chi, encapsulated in the phrase that we seek the stillness within the movements. We start to realize, or I've started to realize, that there's a habit of rushing. Got to go forwards, got to go back, got to go forwards, got to go back. But we don't need to rush. It's not a race. and then turn a little. And in the other direction. And around. So in an exercise like this, good places to try and give yourself a chance to recognize that punctuation point would be when your weight is in one hip or another, or one foot or another. But eventually you'll start to find your own places. And the next stage from that is really just the stillness is there as a presence within the movement, as that phrase I recited would suggest. Go in the other direction. Stepping out. Again, one of the ideas that I've suggested in the past is that when your foot goes down on the floor, rather than bringing it straight back, you put your heel down, you lower your toes, apply very gentle pressure to push the foot towards the floor and then come back. This is why I've stopped referred to them as pauses. It's not like things stop. I suppose you could argue that the nature of the movement changes. And then on the other side. And then. So the habit of hurrying is nationwide in our society, right across the whole of the Western world, if not the whole world. And you know, we regard it as a virtue that I must do this. We've got all this to do. We we meet people. I've got so much to do. I've got to do this. This is happening. This is happening. But there's a virtue too in stillness, and it's the stillness within the movement. We learn through Tai Chi. This isn't an either or prospect. And let your hands drop down. Turn your hands palm forwards, easing forwards and backwards. And then as you go forwards, keeping your hands facing back, this time, go back. But taking that idea of the punctuation just a little bit further. So, for instance, and I'm going to exaggerate this so you can actually see what's going on, but it's really a very subtle process. I go forwards, my hips are already sinking back, but my hands are still going forward. So there's a sort of pull back. Same thing as I go forward from the back, so it's there, but now my hips and my shoulders are going back. That pulls the elbow down. So rather than this, what's happening is the fingers are trying to go that way, just a gentle pull through to bring them back. So what I'm not doing is getting to here and trying to lift my arms. It's really, as I go back and the hip sinks, my elbow drops here. Again, this is very exaggerated there. So hip sinks back, shoulder sinks back, that causes the elbow to drop, and you can see the fingers just go out there. This is a good exercise to practice that idea with. And once we've got that sense of the connections in the body that form this way, then in different ways we find it in all of the exercises. So that punctuation, that stillness, leads to a greater awareness of movement from within. This idea of Tai Chi Qigong being internal arts. Changing this time to pigeon spreads its wings. So once we've recognized that process, and once we've recognized what's behind that, the stillness, we start to discover the moments when it happens. We train ourselves to move in this way. And so rather than making it happen, it becomes a much more organic, natural process. And we're able to observe how our body builds that process. It can give us a sense of very subtle movement, and this takes us into the realms of the energy and so on and so forth. One more of these. Changing. Hands loosely fisted. and then opening up and winding out. One more time. Changing now to polishing the table. Last time. Bring your hands and push up. The punctuation comes as you rotate your arms. One more time. And bring your hands out. And before you go, don't just lift your arms, just rest for a moment. Look for that positioning of your hands, wherever it may be, whether you can feel the weight of your arms hanging from your shoulders. And then push up. And once again, can you feel the weight of your arms hanging from your shoulders? And so we develop, as I've mentioned before, this intuitive sense of where we want our arms to go. And so the pathway that we take to get them there becomes smoother. You may begin to associate it with certain physical elements. So here, for instance, with this one, my elbows dropping is significant. But again, a lot of this is about what you're observing. Same thing here. This is probably reasonably comfortable on the arm, but is it comfortable on your back? What happens if you sink your hips back? And if you sink your hips back, that will start to draw you up. And again, can we find that position? A little bit smoother and a little bit more flowing. So we begin to find a way that enables us to make often quite challenging movements. Any movement that involves our arms going up, for instance, can be quite difficult. You probably know, so sometimes putting something on a shelf and you start to wobble around and so on and so forth. Your hands come down. The weight of your arms here. Dragon plucks the stars from the sky. Rotating, feel the weight of your arm going down through your body. Then draw down. So if we look at this side of the movement, if we start to integrate it into our practice, it's one of those things that really spills over into our daily lives. The physical effect, being able to make movements that may be being quite tricky, becoming smoother for us. And that, if you like, mental aspect of just that, not hurrying, not rushing. It has nothing to do with the speed that you go at. You can go quite fast but still not feel rushed. You can go quite slowly and still be in a hurry. And the key to sort of neutralizing that is to find something to rest your attention on, like these moments of punctuation, rather than your thoughts going immediately to the next movement. One of the things I like with this one, I like to think with this exercise, is that I follow the movement up through my arm to my fingers, back down. I feel the contraction in the side, and my arm comes all the way down. I feel the weight of my arm. I let my attention pan across my body, and then I start on the other side. That panning I described, I think, probably to most of you, like a camera in a documentary panning across the landscape. Belly, lower back, and then to the other hip, and then the push on. I may find, for instance, that in bringing my arm up, what I've done is I've lifted my shoulder because it's an exaggerated version. I get to here, I can't really feel the weight of my arm, but here, when I've managed to drop my shoulder, I can. And it's that same releasing feeling. The intent to feel that releasing as much as you possibly can, all the way through all of the movements. One more round of this. Sit back into your right hip, hold the ball. Part of the wild horse's mane, settling into the front foot on the left, settling in to your right hip, settling into your left hip, and then into the right foot. So far from interrupting the flow, we begin to realize that the stillness element actually contributes to the flow. White hay offers fruit, so we settle in to the left foot, and as we do, we let the chest contract, the weight doesn't move, bringing the hand through. Now we can move back a little bit, turn towards the left, towards your hand, forwards, coming back. Try not to think ahead, so again, punctuated here, you're holding the ball over your left hip. You're extending your arm over the right leg. You're coming back. You're holding the ball over the left hip again, and so on and so forth. I find that these help me to remember the movements, that stillness helps me to recall the correct movement. Doesn't always work. Nothing works 100%. Rather than grasping after the next, I can't remember, oh, I can't remember. We just relax a little. Sometimes the memory will sort of pop up. Other times it won't. One more round on each side. And rest. A couple of slow, gentle breaths. Once again, rubbing your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder, your arm. The other side. Upper part of your chest. Your belly. And your legs. Put your heels up. And around. Back the other way. Okay. And then standing. So you can use the chair for support. Of course, I just like to get mine out of the way as much as I can. So standing, and this little sequence of rooting down Wild Goose and Parting the Clouds. So sink down, bring your hands around, and then pushing up. Rotate your arms, sinking down. Turn your hands out. Sharp. Feel your hips beginning to sink, elbows beginning to drop, sink down. Your hands drop to their full length, feel their weight, pushing up. Feel your hips beginning to drop, elbows being drawn down. That brings your fingers downwards through the soap. Your hands back to the starting position, go through the set again. One more round. One foot forwards. Move your weight into the front foot. Imagine taking a breath in through your leg, and as you breathe out, looking for that releasing feeling in ankle, knee, hips, and buttocks. And then going back, same thing, breathe in, breathe out, releasing all the way down through the leg. And you do that as many times as you like, but gradually you'll learn to focus on the releasing feeling. You can't breathe through your leg in any case. So you were just using the idea of the breathing to physically stop us rushing, stop the sort of forward, backward, becoming a bit manic. But we just take that moment to settle. Raising your toes and your heel. And then stepping in. On the other side, it goes into your front foot. Take that breath in and out, releasing as you breathe out. And then into your back foot again. And then just letting it become a little bit more fluid, continuous, without losing that quality. And really, whatever label you put on it, releasing, stillness, settling. They're all just words that we use to label an experience. Raising your toes and your heel. Stepping in. And even here, so when you step in, sometimes when I do this, I can come in and I'm like, oh, that's nice. I can lift my foot up. Other times I might step in, I'm a bit out of line, so oh, I'm a bit wobbly. Settle. And step through. And going back. Right foot forwards. Fisherman cast the net. Once again, I go forwards, my arms start to swing, so I'm settling, and now my hips start to really drop back. This is happening, and that again draws the elbows down. So with that very much in mind, turning as you come back, and the hips dropping down, and the circle just becomes, the circular movement in the arms just becomes a little bit higher. Don't take your hips back quite so quickly. We can begin to understand this internal dynamic. That means that we can begin to make this movement smooth all the way through, not just on the downward movements, but on the upward movements as well. So here, I'm not letting my weight go back in the same way as I was quite with fisherman cast the net. In any case, that's only a very, very slight movement. I was exaggerating it to demonstrate it, but it's the downward movement. Change over. And try, you know, fisherman casting net is a good exercise to try and get a sense for that dynamic. You can begin to feel it working, and it will work differently in each exercise, maybe even from one moment to the next. So although I'm trying to describe this in quite technical terms, there's a point where that fails. And once again, it's experiential. And if you think too hard about it, you can end up getting very out of sync. So my hips would go back, my hands would go, and it all falls apart. You have to go back to the feeling at that point. And then turning. Just open up the front foot a little bit, go into the step in, or whichever direction you want to go into. Remember, I do this linearly, but it's part, I want to keep facing the camera. It's a convenient way of doing it. I could, for instance, get to here and think, well, maybe I'll go this way, but I'll very quickly go off camera. So it's can't really do that, but you could go around in the circle. I'm going to change direction now, going backwards in my case. This time, come back into your stance. Wind blows the willows, or rather, we're going to go, what we're going to do, we're going to go into dragonfly skims the water. So here, before you go any further, and that starts to happen, and you get that sense of settling, then bring the foot up. It's only a moment, but you might want to make it more than a moment just to get used to it. I'm going to change direction. Move within the space that you have, though. These are the moments of choice, I suppose you could say. Here, I've got a choice about where I put my foot down. And the exercise has certain restrictions in terms of the choice, but I could, for instance, go here. Maybe there. Where I'm going to go next, I'll have to go back. And so on. Here is where the direction changes. And just bring your feet parallel. Stand for a moment. Shake out. Okay. Go back to your chairs. Just a reminder that there won't be a class on Thursday this week, but I'll be back on Tuesday lunchtime. The email bulletin will go out in the meantime, and you may notice the earlier classes on Tuesday morning aren't running, but that's okay. That's just because I might be back late, so just in case I sleep over or something like that, I've cut the first two classes, the first class that I would do on a Tuesday, but this class will still be running. So embrace tiger, return to the mountain. I love this image of the return to the mountain. And again, it's that same process. So again, we can use all sorts of ideas and images and sensations to help us to relate to this, which we use is a very personal thing. And can vary from time to time. Sometimes it can be very physical. Sometimes it can just be the memory of the stopping, or a phrase like the stillness within the movement, and so on. Sometimes it might be giving just a little bit of time, a few moments to your posture. Where are your feet? Have you got a little bit of your weight forwards? Can you feel your hips sinking down? Can you feel that softening in your feet, your lower back, the shoulders? It might be bringing your attention to your breathing. That's very common, but not everybody can do that comfortably. So there's all sorts of things. It might even be noticing there's tension in your shoulders. Oh, my shoulders are stiff. And they shouldn't be taking that moment to let them drop, or in your chest or something like that. So all sorts of things can remind you that we want to seek this stillness, and can help you to find it again. Because from that point of view, the stiffness, the tightness in our body can actually be quite useful. Let your hands drop down, feel their weight hanging down. Push them out. Still aware of the weight of your arms, not trying to sort of hide that weight. Bring your hands around. Quite tricky to get the weight of your arms to go down through your body when they're away from your body like this, but it can be done. Bringing your hands in and then dropping down. Again, embrace tiger, return to moon. One more time. And rest. Thank you very much, everybody.